Hi everyone, it's Miss Jenna again for another Trout Thursday. And today we're gonna first do a little bit of an update on how our fish are doing, and then also go into kind of what is farm fishing and aquaculture versus the fishery industry, and kind of, what is the fate of fish in general when it comes to human consumption, and different kind of tips and tricks about sustainable fishing, where to buy fish that you're going to eat, and kind of how you know that your plate of food is coming from a sustainable source that is both good for the earth, good for the fish, and good for you. So here we go. Starting with our little guys, girls, they have gotten quite big and are kind of really active. They've spread out throughout the entire tank. Remember the last time they were all just in a tiny cluster right up here. They're also getting used to being top fed, being fed. Whenever my hand comes up here, they're like, oh yes, do you have food? They are a little over 40 days old and they're doing great. As you can look around and see, you can still see a couple are a little bit smaller, like that girl at the bottom, versus your bigger fish. But again, you're always going to have kind of, as in chickens, like that pecking order, where your bigger, stronger fish are going to be eating a lot more than your smaller fish. But she's still doing all right down there, chugging along. She'll just take a little longer to get as big as these other ones. You can see though that even this set of eggs, they have that white tip to their fin, which is pretty cool. All these girls are nice and chunky. They've been eating throughout the day. A couple of pinches spread on top, they come on up. The water chemistry on both of the tanks actually has been really good. So still chugging along and doing some great stuff, even with a lot more fish in this tank than we had from the last batch. So speaking of the last batch, that would be our 6 fingerlings that we have. They are now 111 days old, and they themselves have also gotten bigger. As you can see, a couple inches long already, definitely the size of my finger. And these girls also have gotten very used to people. She's coming right up to the camera. Very used to people, and used to us putting their food right up here. We have the auto feeder on for them, where the auto feeder actually has the little baby food in it. Recently, as I've been giving them some pinches throughout the day, I've actually been giving them the slightly larger food because they have now reached a size where their mouth is big enough to be able to eat that food. And so we're gonna again see how these girls kind of shape up as they get bigger, but they still definitely have their white tips on their fins and their beautiful kind of rainbow coloration on their side. That pink stripe is starting to come in as well. Again, this tank's water chemistry is doing great too, so you can check that out on the Google Sheets that we have up on the website. So now moving on to the bulk of our lesson today, with talking about fish farming and everything like that. I don't know a better way to do this because I don't know how to sub in my audio over top of pictures. So instead I'm just gonna flip the camera around and show you some pictures on my computer as we talk about different things, just so that you can get an idea of in your brain of what it actually looks like. So starting off, fish farming versus fishing, fisheries. So fish farming, the fancy name for it is aquaculture. You are raising your fish, or even fish meaning like shellfish, things like that as well, in a controlled area. So either in a tank, in a pond, in a run, or even in cages in the ocean, but it's a controlled environment. The humans are responsible for, taking care of everything, and the fish are captive. They can't go places. They're in their confined areas. Versus fishing, or your fishery industry, which means actively people going out and casting a rod, or most likely for your fishery industries, using big nets, trawl nets, long lines, things like that, in order to catch fish. Fish in the United States, we are one of the top kind of people that go out and collect fish. We have a lot of people that live in the United States, and a lot of people do like to eat fish. However, of course, China, Japan, those countries that fish is their culture, with sushi and all the other fish dishes that they eat, they're definitely on the top with all the fishery industries. So fisheries and aquaculture, kind of, they both have their bonuses and they both have their negatives. Anytime that people are using animals as food, there's always detriments and benefits. And it's kind of figuring out what is the best situation out of a bad thing kind of deal. I'm not vegan, I'm not vegetarian. However, I'm a big advocate of knowing where your food comes from. So many people go to the grocery store and, you know, buy a pack of chicken, buy sushi, buy whatever, and they don't understand the connection that used to be a living animal. And I'm all for knowing that it was a living animal and knowing how it was treated and how it was raised in order then to become your food. So we're going to go over kind of both of those methods, the good about them, the bad about them, and then how you can make the decision of where to find your fish, or, you know, your food in general. So starting off, we are going to be looking at your kind of aquaculture things. So I'm going to show you next the couple of different setups that aquaculture can have. So again, aquaculture is raising fish in a captive environment for your food. So here is an ocean kind of fish farming method where basically these big metal cages are set up, and the fish are confined to each of these little bubbles, and then the people go on the boats and work things out with feeding and everything like that. The great thing about this method is you don't have to worry about water quality as much because this is the ocean. So things can kind of ebb and flow in and out. So you're mainly worried about feeding the fish, how many are in each of these cages, because again, you don't want it to be overrun because then the fish can get different diseases and such. But definitely a lot less maintenance in this method. Now, of course, the bad thing for this is that it is in the ocean, and this is a lot of condensed kind of waste. So you're talking, you know, your fish are going to poop. So you have a lot of that kind of ammonia buildup and everything like that then is leaching into the ocean. So all of the ocean surrounding this area might not be as healthy as the rest of the ocean is. Your next kind of thing, sorry, this is small, it's the best picture I could find. Here is more of a landlocked situation where you have all these different ponds, and so the different ponds then you're moving fish around to based on how big they are or what types they are. The coloration is caused from the different kind of algae that's blooming in each of these ponds, but you can see it is at least this way, it's landlocked. Now, however, you still need to figure out how to do water changes, right? So we do water changes on our tanks, that's easy. We do, you know, on our little one about 15 gallons and our big one maybe 50 gallons at a time. Well, with these, you're talking like hundreds of thousands of gallons of water in these ponds. So where does that go? So the kind of detriment with this situation is a lot of these kind of locations will then just blast the poopy water into a nearby stream, or if it's close to an ocean, into the ocean, things like that. And again, then you're just putting that pollution that's in this small area into a larger area. So that can always be an issue there. If these ponds aren't overcrowded, it can be easier to do that. I also am interested, I'd have to look this up, if they can use this fish water as like fertilizer for crops as well. So I'll have to look into that one. Then getting into even more landlocked kind of areas. So this is a typical trout hatchery run setup. So your fish start off in one run that's for your, small fish, and then as they get bigger, they move up into each of these runs. And depending on where this hatchery is, they either will, a lot of times will use water from a nearby stream to cycle this water through. So again, you have that nice clean water that's cycling through. These generally aren't as large as your ponds or as your ocean areas, and so again, it's not as much pollution to worry about then in this case. The kind of newer way of doing it is this method, which is recirculating systems. And basically the water that's in here is the same as, our tanks. This is just a bigger version where all the water is just recirculated within the system. They have filters, everything like that. The great thing about this system is you can do it in the cold. So you can continue to raise fish year round because you're inside of a temperature controlled building. So that's always helpful here. Then we can move into kind of your fisheries. So again, we have our things where, where we have the fish in captivity, so to speak. They can't get out anywhere. And then your fisheries is where you're actively going out into the wild to catch fish. This right here is the best method for a couple of reasons. One, it's fun to, throw your line out in the ocean with these deep sea fishing trips and see what fish bite your hook. It is amazing the creatures that are living below the surface that you might pull up. The other good thing about this is it's, a couple of lines that are out there. And we'll go over bycatch, but there's usually no bycatch because you've got one, maybe two hooks on each of your lines. And so you're only catching a couple of fish at a time, and ideally the fish that you're trying to catch. Also, a lot of times your boat captains are pretty knowledgeable and can take you to good spots where you're going to catch the fish that you want to catch. They know how to handle fish that you're not allowed to catch, how to put them back safely, everything like that. I occasionally go to St. John, U.S. Virgin Islands, and we go fishing, and it's always fun because sometimes, without a doubt, someone is going to catch a barracuda. And typically we don't eat the barracuda. There's also a couple of other fish that you don't eat based on their diet. So with barracuda being very predatory fish, they can have a lot of mercury built up in them from biomagnification, which is basically when the small fish are eating the plankton that has mercury, and then the bigger fish are eating the small fish that have mercury, and that mercury is just kind of building up in their system. So typically a large predatory fish is going to have more mercury in it than a smaller fish. Now this is fine if you're eating it every once in a while, but if fish is a big part of your diet, you have to be careful about eating a lot of large carnivorous fish because the mercury will then build up in your system as well. There are other fish, especially on coral reefs, that you can't eat because the fish eat the coral and the coral is toxic. So then if you eat the fish, then you get the toxins as well. But that's the lovely thing about just going out on a boat with a captain that knows what he's talking about and can educate you on what fish are okay and what are not. Also, at this point, you're only catching the number of fish that you're going to be eating, or that the boat captain is going to be, selling. It's not a huge industry kind of thing. How a lot of deep sea fishing is done, which I'm going to see which tab this is. Yeah, so this is what happens. Let me see if I can find... Oh, I don't have a picture of it. I'll have to pull up a picture. Basically, they just put huge nets in the ocean, and whatever gets pulled up, gets pulled up. They try to specifically find the schools of fish. Sometimes they will fly helicopters or seaplanes over to see if they can locate the fish from above. There are fish finders, there are, all these different things. But all of this is called bycatch. And bycatch is anything that's not the fish that you're trying to catch. So I'm not sure what fish that these guys were going after, but you can see all the extra things that they caught. including, you know, our little shark friend here. We have, it looks like a whole bunch of scallop shells, which are alive. They have the scallops inside of them. These big prawns, like all the seaweed. Who knows what other smaller fish might be in this bycatch here. Because as you take that net through the ocean, whatever is swimming there is going to get caught up in this net. And because you're then not going to be eating any of this, or legally you might not be able to keep it based on different laws, this is now all going to waste, because sometimes even putting it back, it's not going to live. It really depends on the species. If it got tangled in the net, you know, if it sustained injuries, how long it was out of the water, everything like that. And also, the sad thing is it's not just what's in the water, it's also what's on top of the water. So here we have some seabirds that actually got caught up in the net as well. And that's because your seabirds, they're like, oh, there's a bunch of fish here, let me eat the fish. And they'll either dive down in the water and get caught in the nets, or the, I believe it's the long lines, I'll have to find a picture, they have these wires and ropes that come out, and the birds can sometimes hit those and get caught up in them too. So again, it's not just what's under the water, it's also the animals on top of the water. So here we have those couple of different kind of fishing methods. Again, we have our fish farming back here, okay, but with the fisheries, you have your trawling, which is literally just a huge net bag thing that you drag across the ocean, and you pick up what you pick up. There's purse seine fishing, which is more of an upwards kind of fishing, like Finding Nemo, what those fish get caught in. Then you have these, which is drift net, which drift net catches so much bycatch because it's literally just a net floating along in the ocean, and the fish just swim right through it. It's almost like a mist net when you're talking about bird banding. They can't see it, and so they just are like la-di-da. Or as it's drifting in the ocean, an unsuspecting turtle, shark, dolphin, whale, all sorts of these other animals are going to get caught up in these. And then you have your long line fishing, which is basically almost like the net, but instead of a net, then you just have a whole bunch of hooks. So this is a little bit better because it's only catching a fish that comes and bites the hook instead of a fish that happens to just get unlucky and get stuck in the net. But these are the issues with the seabirds, because the seabirds will crash down into the water to try to get the fish and either get hung up on the hook itself or in these lines that are right here. And that's how they get caught. And then again, you can see they have the spotter plane that is looking for the fish to be able to locate them. You have your sonar or your fish finder that's trying to find them. So there are a lot of different commercial fishing strategies, which is, again, the whole know where your food comes from. A lot of fish that you buy at the supermarket is from commercial fishing. So figuring out where your fish are coming from and what method is used in order to see if you're eating a sustainable fish.
Now, what does it mean when we say kind of sustainable? So sustainable means that it's, never ending, so to speak. That there's always, it's in a cycle. It doesn't mean that, when we fish and we overfish, that there's not enough fish in the population to then bring the population back up. So kind of how does that look in a general overall fishery aspect? So of course, the first part is the data, is collecting data. How many fish are there? What fish are there? What does their life cycle look like? The assessment, scientists using that data to actually assess, are the fish healthy? Is the environment around the fish healthy? Is it an environment that's suitable to sustain fish? Then the managers kind of use that assessment of the fish to then set the regulations. So there are regulations both for fisheries and then also for aquaculture as well. You have to have permits, licensings, all of that kind of stuff. Now, not to say that there isn't illegal fisheries and fish farming, but that try their best, and at least in the United States, for the most part, most fisheries and aquaculture locations are upholding the rules set forth by managers and the government. And those rules are there for a reason. They're there to, protect the fish and make sure that there are fish for future generations. So then management uses the assessments that the scientists put forth to set those rules, and then the fishermen are there to kind of support that and follow those rules. The other important aspect of fishermen is actually to see what's out there. Sometimes there's a kind of a disconnect in this way, or even a disconnect here, because management is just using what the scientists told them in order to make these rules, but then the fishermen are actually out there in the water doing the fishing, and so they can see population studies and everything like that actually in real time, like what is out there. And fishermen oftentimes are big proponents of conservation, because if the fish aren't being conserved, there's going to be no fish for them to fish for. So kind of that sustainable fisheries method, this is how it goes. Kind of works the similar way for your aquaculture industry as well. They're taking data from the wild to kind of make different assessments. It's just that this is so that our wild population doesn't deteriorate, whereas for our aquaculture, it's mainly making sure that the aquaculture system itself doesn't deteriorate, since that's where the fish are coming from, but it's also making sure that those systems aren't polluting the natural environment then as well. There are some good movies out there. I remember watching this when I was younger. I think it was in high school. When this movie came out, it is all about the bluefin tuna industry, and kind of how that industry is decimating the population of tuna fish. And what's interesting is once one species of tuna goes, you just start fishing the next species. And so this you kind of have to, of course, with any sort of documentary, you take it all with a grain of salt. And you then follow up and do your own research. But this is a good place to kind of start to just kind of get an overview of kind of what can happen in the fishery industry. Now, I have not seen this one, but I know that this is hot on Netflix right now, is the Seaspiracy, which is all about the fishery industry as well. I don't know what this is about, so I cannot make a recommendation as to the accuracy of it, or if it is more of just like a shock factor kind of movie, but it's definitely something that I'm going to be looking into watching. Now, so we've talked about, all these detriments about the fishery industry, but what about our lovely little, farm fishing? They have its issues as well. So the couple of big issues with farm fishing is living conditions. First of all, there's a lot of fish in a tight space, which can sometimes lead to disease and the fish getting injured, and kind of the ethics of is the fish okay? And there's been studies done to kind of show that fish are smarter than people give them credit for, but at the same time, they don't feel things as much as people do, or as much as other animals do. So it's the whole ethics and morality of confining an animal in general. But then the other big thing is feeding the fish. A lot of fish eat other fish. So where are you getting those fish to be able to feed them? Well, unfortunately, you usually go and you trawl for fish, little bait fish, in order to crush up to make the pellet food for your fish that are in your aquaculture farms. Now, some research that I did is some fish, such as I think it was tilapia and catfish, they can actually be fed more of a plant-based diet and still be able to convert that into, their meat in order to be harvested. There's also some alternatives that scientists have been studying for the protein aspect such as using soybean meal, and then also using insects, because insects are actually easier to farm, take up less space to farm than, you know, any other animal that would be farmed. A lot of countries, their protein source are insects. So those are kind of the things that they're trying to figure out to make farmed fishing less of an issue. It's also the issue of, as we said in the beginning, about what is done with all the fish waste then as well. But it's kind of one of those things of figuring out what's the lesser evil when it comes to being able to eat fish. Specifically in Maryland, we have a couple of schools, nature centers, government agencies, private organizations that are big into the aquaculture industry, and specifically they're raising things like shad, eel, bluegill, trout, striped bass, yellow perch, tilapia, and oysters. And again, it's kind of figuring out what is the best method for us to farm these fish. Is it better to farm fish, or is it better to catch wild fish? And what method of, you know, fishing is best for both the animal, the environment, and you. So that's where we get into, well, how do you know what you should eat? And I'm not saying that you should never ever eat certain fish ever again because it's not sustainably harvested, but it's kind of making your conscious decision to do better. And as long as, you know, one person is attempting, you're you know, it's not just, oh, I don't matter, I'm just one person. It can make a difference. So this one is a great resource. So Monterey Bay Aquarium has Seafood Watch. You can access it online, or they also have a great app. And on the app and online, you can actually search for a species of fish. And the app even has a sushi list as well. So I'm just going to type in rainbow trout. There it is. Look at that. I'm going to click our rainbow trout, and I'm going to click search. So we have our trout. And it says which ones you should buy first because they're the best choice, being the most sustainable. So your rainbow trout, farming in ponds and farming in a raceway or farming in a freshwater net, those are your best ones. Even the indoor recirculating tanks, they're your best choices. Try to buy them first. Then it scrolls down. Then they even have, you know, certified products of which ones have been certified and where they come from. And then as we scroll down, some alternatives. If you can't buy the good trout, this is another one that is better. So from Chile, in a marine net pen is okay. It's better. Be aware of the concerns because it is a marine net pen versus a more controlled body of water. And again, it just is telling you what's some alternatives, where are they from. So then we have avoid. So we're gonna want to avoid rainbow trout that are from Colombia in these freshwater net pens. So now this freshwater net pen could be fine. It could be great for the fish, but apparently in Colombia, these fish we want to avoid, probably because they're just not sustainable. So let's find out. So here we have kind of their overall score that they're giving it. It gives you an at-a-glance kind of thing. So it says water quality wasn't available, enforcement of effluent-related regulations, which means the wastewater, again, because the fish poop. So where that polluted water then goes, they're not sure. Chemical use, again, seems to be low. Still not the best. Moderate scores for habitat, feed escapes, and disease and other risks. So you can see here how it has, you know, good things are okay, and then all of these things are just listed as not being the greatest. Whereas if we go back and we click on our healthy best options, okay, so our first choice here, we have our trout in the United States, outdoor flow through raceway. If we click the details for this one, it will then take you, and it says, there we go. So this one has a 6.7 score, and look at all these green. All these greens are great. It says it's best choice. Environmental impacts are minimal. It says that the oversight of where the wastewater goes, the chemicals use, it's strong because again the United States has a lot of regulations on how the fish are kept and where pollution water goes, minimizes disease, and again because it's a landlocked option of the aquaculture, there's little to no escapes that are likely to. So that's a whole other thing to think about, is an impact that aquaculture can have is escaping. Sometimes fish that are raised in certain areas aren't native to that area, and if they escape, you can then impact the local surrounding. So again, this website is just, I love it. I use it anytime that I go and either buy fish, eat fish at a restaurant. If the restaurant doesn't have it listed, not all of them will, listed as to where the fish comes from, you can easily ask someone, look it up, and really make those best choices so that your impact isn't as bad as another impact could be from eating an unsustainable fish source. Again, some fisheries are sustainable as well, and this doesn't discriminate between the two. It will tell you, okay, it's actually better for you to eat this specific fish being harvested from a fishery aspect rather than it being harvested from a farming aspect. So this says all the stuff that you need to know. It gives you all sorts of different other projects that they're working on, anything that you want to know about, what seafood choices that you're making in your life to be sustainable. The other big thing is this lovely picture here, and this shows just how much food is wasted after people purchase it to eat, and then they don't eat it or they don't finish their plate. This is how many millions of dollars are wasted from people, say, going somewhere and they go and they're like, oh, I'm gonna get, some tuna sushi. So our little bluefin tuna down here, they're gonna get some tuna sushi. $3.4 million is thrown away in fish each year because people are like, I'm not gonna finish it. It blows my mind. Halibut, look at halibut and sea trout. $45 to almost $60 million is wasted from people not eating the fish then that they order and that are on their plate. And of course you have supply and demand, so if more people are ordering the fish, more fish are going to have to be harvested either through a farming situation or through a fishery situation, and so then the demand goes up, so your supply has to go up, so they're going to be fishing even more fish out, and to then end up just wasting that fish's life is pretty interesting. So another thing, and it's not just fish, eat your food, finish your food, try to be as least wasteful as possible, so that the fish didn't lose its life in vain. So I hope you all learned a little something about all the different methods of harvesting fish that we end up eating, and how to kind of be a little bit more sustainable if you choose to eat fish, which I thoroughly enjoy fish. I think though that the best fish is always the one that you catch yourself and cook up yourself. It's just kind of something special to go through the entire process of it. And going fishing is just a lot of fun as well. And it's called fishing, by the way, not catching, because it's not guaranteed that a fish is going to be on your hook. So don't get discouraged if you don't end up landing a fish the first time that you go fishing. Now, speaking of fish, we did a little update already on our baby fry and then on our fingerlings, but now I have a little bit of an update on our two big female trout that we released a couple weeks ago. Tom and Jim ended up going back down to the stream to kind of look for them, and they ended up finding them about 300 yards upstream from where we released them. So they ended up swimming up against that current, and they were found in a a nice deep pool there, and we have some really awesome footage of them to show you all. As always, if you have any questions, comments, anything like that, feel free to email us at our Trout in the Classroom Gmail account, and we'll be sure to answer anything or have a discussion with you in our next video. But until then, we'll see you in 2 weeks. Bye!